This week in Know How, we're looking at your feedback, and then I'm going to teach you how to build a FreeNAS. Woohoo!
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Know How is brought to you by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
Welcome to Know How. It's the Twitch show where we bend, break, build, and upgrade. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, and I'm joined by...
I'm Patrick Norton.
Yeah, that's right. Patrick Norton of Twitch and Tekzilla fame. We're going to be talking about FreeNAS. And I thought, hey, you know, there's really no one that I'd more have on the show than Patrick Norton when talking about FreeNAS.
Well, you know, I'm actually kind of excited myself. We just did on Tryin. We did a FreeNAS build a few weeks ago. It's a show I do with a guy named Michael Hand. And we've also made donuts on the show. We're kind of all over the map on this one. It's really fun. We actually got to meet some of the developers.
No
so
way.
We're going to actually try to get a bunch of the developers on to get really deep. There is so much going on in FreeNAS. If you keep it simple, though, you can build an amazing bomb-proof NAS for free.
That's what I love about it. I mean, it is something that a beginner can pick up and literally have installed on a box in 10 minutes. I mean, no problem. Have it up and running. But it's an enterprise-based solution. I could install ZFS, get a set of really nice high-end drive arrays, and run it for my enterprise.
Well, it's kind of like, and people do actually use it in enterprise environments with huge disk arrays that are storing terabytes and terabytes, bordering on petabytes of data. And there's kind of a decision you have to make early on. Do I buy inexpensive hardware or recycle an old box? Or do I want to go ZFS in the full-on badass high-end configuration, which is going to require memory and a decent processor and spending more money?
Right. Now, Patrick, let's get to it. We're going to be talking about FreeNAS. I know that you just did a FreeNAS episode on Tryin, and it was great. It was fantastic. We're a little messier here on Know How, so I actually got a box.
Many episodes of Tryin, have you?
No. I'm going to say you're more pro than we, because this is just a junk box that, again, I pulled from downstairs. I believe if
This is a Core 2 Duo.
Yeah, it's a Core 2 Duo.
This is creme de la creme of 2006.
It's got a little age on it.
Wait, back off.
Oh, yeah, that's how you know it's used. Actually, here, you want to grab that tag? The other way you know it's used is
wipe, bad, reinstall.
Yeah, so that tells us that this was a machine that we were just about to toss out. There's not a lot of good things about this machine anymore. I've actually already upgraded the memory.
Actually, let's be honest. It's still running.
It's true. Yep.
It's free.
It's more or less clean.
It's not being used for anything. And there's actually a pretty good amount of power inside of a Core 2 Duo. For a basic server box, there is more than enough going on here.
Right, exactly. Now, if I wanted to build a gaming machine, I wouldn't start with this. But like you said, for something that's going to be a dumb headless server, why not?
Absolutely. But this could rock Bejeweled.
You
could have a dedicated Bejeweled box.
Actually, I bet I could run Candy Crush and Chrome on this. But all right, I've done a few things here. First of all, I've upgraded the memory. It used to have 1 gigabyte of memory and 256 megabyte DIMMs. I've upgraded to 4 gigabyte using 1 gigabyte DIMMs. Now, I don't know how you feel about this, but I always tell people, please, if you're building a server box, don't buy bargain basement memory. I've seen that happen so many times. They save like $5 buying the stuff on Amazon that maybe works for their box.
There's a whole bunch of different layers I'm not going to get into here. It's like if you're building a high-end box, one of the things I got roasted on, we did our FreeNAS build, people are like, you should have used ECC memory. You're fools, you're amateurs. I'm like, well, I used what I had and could afford. I don't go for bargain basement. I go for branded memory. I buy a lot of Corsair memory I'll buy the house memory from a computer shop that I trust. I also tend to recycle memory a lot.
Yeah.
Stripping old machines, what do I have? And also say, max out the memory you can in almost any box you build.
Yes.
Especially if it's going to be like, well, it's $25 for 4 gigabytes or $30 for 6 gigabytes. Get the 6 gigabytes.
Get the sweet spot.
More memory always gives the operating system more room to stretch out.
To stretch. Now, other things that we want about this is, just go ahead and pull out all the drives. You really don't. In fact, I'm going to disconnect the CD-ROM drive here as well.
Right.
The reason why I'm doing that is because I want to have the ability to have a lot of drives on my motherboard. Now, I could use something like this. This is an old Silicon Image SATA card, plugs into a PCI bus, and it gives me 2 additional SATA ports. I could put 2 of these in here and get myself a couple of ports, but I thought, you know what? I'm going to go on the cheap. I'm going to use the 4 ports that are already built into the board, which means get rid of those. I can't have anything plugged into my ports.
Right.
Now, the good folks at home may be saying, but wait a minute, Padre, if you've got no hard drives or CD-ROM installed on this thing, how are you going to install it?
FreeNAS is designed and actually should be booted from a USB drive attached to a USB port on the motherboard, not on the front of the box.
That's what this puppy does. So I've just got a USB CD-ROM drive. It's got the FreeNAS installation disk that I downloaded off of their site as an ISO and burned it. And then I've got this. This is just a standard USB key. This is a 4 gigabyte. You need at least 2 gigabytes to run FreeNAS, but I'm going to say use a 4 gigabyte. The reason for that is there's a lot of USB keys out there that say they're 2 gigs. They're not really 2 gigs. They're that weird accounting. It's close to 2 gigs. It's got to be big enough for FreeNAS to be installed on. Now, don't install it on a hard drive.
You can install it on a hard drive, but if you install it on a hard drive, you're going to use 2 gigabytes of that hard drive for your operating system, and you cannot do anything with the rest of that hard drive.
Right.
So that's
how it
part of the way
works.
FreeNAS is configured to be relatively secure, to boot off a separate image that is locked down and cannot be manipulated by hackers or fiends. And it, just save the hard drives for storing your data, put the OS on the nice little USB drive, which is also kind of a line in the sand for older machines, because if they won't boot off of a USB drive, you're probably not going to want to try to build it into a FreeNAS box.
Right.
So.
Now, the other thing is I've got 4 2-terabyte drives here, but unfortunately, this older power supply, I'm afraid, is going to blow up if I try to power them all at the same time.
That's like a 300-watt power supply.
But it's downgraded because it's been down. It's actually,
It's dead.
Like last night, I almost blew it
Did you
out.
blow it up?
Yeah.
It is a 300-watt power
It is
supply.
a 300 but it doesn't like all those hard drives. So what I did was I did our little ATX trick, and I'm actually running this little array of drives. If you back out here, this little array of drives is run off of the an external ATX power supply that I'm going to turn on.
You
right
could,
now.
if you wanted to, install these inside of the case, and I think you would probably, if you weren't using this for other purposes, put the ATX power supply inside of the case.
But I'm trying to go ghetto right now.
It's very visual.
It's very visual, right?
If you want to go ghetto, we can get duct tape.
No. Now, if you could go ahead and just plug in that USB drive into the front port and power it up, the installation process is actually really, really, really simple. You just make sure that you're booting off of your CD-ROM drive. I'm going to jump into my little boot menu, make sure that I am. There we go. And what I'm going to tell my computer is to go ahead and boot and take its instructions off of the boot CD, which I have burned from the FreeNAS site, which is right here. Ta-da! After this, there's only one more selection I have to tell it. I have to tell it to go ahead and install. It's going to unpack the package onto the flash drive, decompress it, and give me a really nice to read interface.
And then there's going to be, but in between those things, there's going to be a lot of gibberish on the screen.
Yeah, don't try to figure out the gibberish. Now, while this loads up, while this goes, I'm thinking maybe we should use this time to find out a little something about a RAID. We've got a pre-recorded video, Patrick.
Cool.
What do you think we take a look at a quick tip? If you've played the PC game long enough, you've probably heard about RAID, a redundant array of independent or inexpensive drives, depending on how old school you are. Now, if you are old school, you probably remember when there were really 6 levels of RAID, RAID 0 through 5. RAIDs 2, 3, and 4 are really just a historical footnote, so if you want to know about them, go ahead and jump over to Wikipedia. But we're going to start with RAID 0. RAID 0 was taking 2 or more drives and running them in what was called a stripe. I took those 2 or more drives and I alternated blocks between them so that they looked like one big drive. Now, there are some huge performance benefits from this. If I have 2 drives that seem like one big drive, it means that I could pull data from both of those drives at the same time when I'm reading, or I could write to both of those drives at the same time when I'm writing, effectively doubling the bandwidth I get in either direction. Now, it never turns out that way because of the overhead, but it's still a huge performance bonus. On the con side, when I have things in a RAID 0, which we sometimes call scary RAID, it means if I lose one drive, I lose the entire array. Because the information is written across both drives, there is not a complete copy. If one falls out, if one dies, if one desyncs, I've probably lost the entire set of data. So that's why we also called RAID 0 suicide RAID. Now RAID 1 is not a stripe. RAID 1 is mirroring. So I take these two drives and I make exact copies of them. Of course, I'm going to need the same capacity on these drives. This has the performance benefit of being able to read from both drives at the same time. So I do get that performance bonus like I do with RAID 0. But when I'm writing, I have to write the exact same data to each one, which does slow it down. Another disadvantage of RAID 1 is that unlike RAID 0, which looks like one big drive, RAID 1 takes the total capacity of the two drives and it divides it in half because one has to be a mirror. Now RAID 5 is, well, it's weird. It's the first array that we're talking about that includes parity. When I have a RAID 5 array, I'm writing parity across my drives, which allows me to lose one drive and still be able to keep my array. In fact, I can have a RAID 5 array with as few as 3 drives. For example, if I were to make a RAID 5 array with 4 drives, I could keep the total capacity of 3 of them. In this case, I'd keep, 6 terabytes out of 8, and then I would just lose 1 in my parity use. That also means that I could lose 1 drive and rebuild the array from the parity information that's remaining on the other 3 drives. RAID 5 has sort of become a standard for use inside of network-attached storage devices and enterprise-class storage. Now, there's also RAID 6, which is essentially the same as RAID 5, but I have 2 drives. I could lose 2 drives in the array before I lose the array. We've seen a bunch of hybridization of these RAID levels. For example, there's a lot of manufacturers that are running RAID 0, scary RAID, suicide RAID, but with SSDs. Because SSDs tend to be far more reliable than rotating storage, they feel comfortable in having scary RAID and still, giving you the performance benefit without worrying about data loss. For those who are ultra paranoid, we've got levels like RAID 1+0 or RAID 0+1, which can be a mirror of a striped array or a striped array of mirrored arrays. It's a lot of different hybridization that you get from the manufacturers. Everyone from Synology and IOSave to Netgear have their own proprietary way of getting the most performance out of their individual product lines. Now, when we're speaking about RAIDs, we also have to talk about the write hold. That's W-R-I-T-E, hold. Quite simply, a write hold is that delay between the time a change is committed to an array and when the information is actually written out. In that little bit of a delay, if you lose power, if you lose connectivity, if for any reason your array gets disrupted, you could lose blocks of information or even the entire array. This is especially problematic for RAID 5 arrays and even RAID 6 at some points. Now, there are some new file systems like ZFS which avoid the write hold, but it is something that if you're building an array from scratch, you need to be aware of. That's why I have all my RAIDs on a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply, to make sure that I don't run in to the write hold. Now that you know what a RAID is, go build one. I do not like talking about the write hold. I really don't. It just sounds
I'm not going there.
Not going there. Okay, you know where
we to go with that one.
You know where we should go. Let's go into the NAS box. Now, in the time that that video ran, it fully installed itself and it gave us this. You're not going to get a neat graphical user interface. It basically just gives you 11 options, none of which you really need except for shutdown.
Well, yeah, and you don't need this. You don't care about. Yep. You need this number down here. Then you can unplug the monitor and never actually use this monitor again. Put it somewhere else. Use it somewhere else. Do it. Just this is what you care about. And if you log into 192.168.1.115, we should have something glorious. Something exciting.
If you go to my computer, Brian, you're going to see we get this. Now, the very first thing it's going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to change the password, because do not use 1234. Give it something interesting like, oh, I don't know, how about know-how? No one's going to guess that. There we go. Oh, well, actually, you know what's good? If you type it the same way. There we go. So now what we've got is we've got this is a fully reinstalled system. It's fresh. There's nothing in here from any previous installations. Patrick, what's the first thing I'm going to do?
Set a username and password.
Oh, okay. So I'm assuming that I'm going to go where?
Probably up to the account.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so I jump in. Oh, look at that. I've got groups and users. Assuming I jump into an add user here. Now, why do I have to do this?
Because the people at BSD and FreeNAS said you had to do this.
Okay, good. Yeah, actually, this is going to set up. This is where I'm going to tell the FreeNAS who should be able to access the volumes and the shares that are on my computer.
I mean, it's essentially the glory of this is you have the ability to control who has access to what and what file systems and what areas of the box. But you do that by essentially creating individual user accounts either for everyone or one generic user account that you allow everyone to access. That's if you trust everybody in your house. But if you want to do things like have different parts of your FreeNAS where, let's say the Padre has his backup area and I have my backup area, and then we have a common area where people can upload files and transfer things, and another common area that's read access only so we can download or stream things. It all comes down to setting up users.
Right. So I've got Blackrobe added into my user. Actually, if you see right here, you'll see that that user has now been added. This is also a place where I could delete users. Let's say someone moves on. I don't want them to be able to access my shares anymore. I just drop them right out of here. Now, I've just added a user, but I don't have anything set up on the drives yet, right?
Well, you also have to set up a primary group, and to do that in the most basic form, would set the primary group and set that up as the wheel. So Blackrobe would be part of a group.
So you know what? We're going to call it the wheel. Yay! So we've got a group and we've got a user.
So, if you're a sophisticated power user, you can use Active Directory Server or Open LDAP and merge that in there. We're assuming since you're watching this, you're not. But your next step is, generally speaking, to set up disks. So you've set up a user, you've got an account going, and now we want to take a look at the disks.
So we're going to go down to the Storage tab here, and I believe the first thing we have to do is set up a volume?
Yeah, you're going to take a look at what, you can make sure your operating system, your FreeNAS install, can see everything. And somewhere in there should be
the Zfs Volume Manager.
Now, if you're using ZFS, I want to tell you two things. You want to have a fairly recent processor, and you want to have several gigabytes of RAM. Now, we could argue about this, but generally speaking, I'm following what the FreeBSD community says, which is to have, if you want to do ZFS, which is really cool, which is redundant drives, which is basically the ability to survive multiple drive crashes, you need a whole bunch of drives, at least 4. 10 would be better. Long story there, let's not go into it. But you want to make sure you have enough memory and enough computing power so that it does not take several decades for you to replicate the lost data.
Now, this is bare bones minimum. This is 4 gigabytes of memory. That's actually horrible. I'd say 8 is the minimum that I'd want to run, and I'd say 8 would be my baseline, and then I would add 1 gigabyte for every terabyte above that baseline.
If you are talking about building a less expensive system, you're probably not going to use ZFS. If you're recycling old hardware, you're going to use UFS. It's going to restrict the number of plugins you have. You also want to check out something called NAS for free, which is essentially another distribution or version. Like if you're familiar with Linux, there's like Linux, but there's like this Linux and that Linux and the other Linux and Bob's Linux Part 2. Well, essentially, FreeNAS kind of does the same thing. NAS for free is something a lot of people really enjoy if they're setting up older hardware, less expensive machines, have less money to put into it.
Right.
Where were we?
Well, we were talking about ZFS Volume. So we're in the ZFS Volume Manager right now, and I've given it a volume name of KH. I could encrypt it if I really felt like it. I'm not going to do it on this one because I don't want it to take forever. But Patrick, what's this little thing down here?
Oh boy.
Slider.
I just slide that all the way to the take it all. Take all the space.
Yeah, so we've got 4 drives in this array. I'm telling it to take all 4. One of the things I really like about FreeNAS is it will tell you what is the optimal setup. So right now it's telling me to use a RAIDZ 2. I'll get 3.63 terabytes effective data, which means I'm using a hot spare and parity. So I could lose up to 2 drives of this array, and I'm not going to lose any data.
Which is a really beautiful thing. So, if you come from the Windows world, you probably spend a lot of time ignoring the recommendations the operating systems make. In the case of FreeNAS, do what the nice operating system tells you to do unless you know better.
Right. Now, we talked about scary RAID. I could run this in a Stripe, and look at that. I get all the storage space. I'd get 7.27 terabytes. But, of course, if I lose a single drive.
I felt a disturbance in the force, as if someone lost terabytes of irreplaceable data.
Don't ever do this, please. I don't even know why they put that in there. You shouldn't be allowed to select it.
Some people, a FreeNAS box, an external hard drive, this is not a backup solution or system. This is storage, right? A backup solution is a copy on the system, a copy locally, and a copy stored somewhere else. So you have multiple copies of your data. So if your system falls down and goes boom, you have at least 2 copies of the data somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
But yes.
The only reason why I could think of that you would want to use a stripe is if you had multiple computers that were running that stripe and you were bouncing across boxes so that you could get maximum performance. That's about it. That's the only.
If you're insane, some insane situation where you're backing up for maximum performance and then doing a second replication for long term, let it go. ZF, do what the nice operating system tells you, which in this case is ZFS 2, and I think it is getting it's writing its volumes.
Yeah. So what it's doing right now is it's preparing all the drives. It's saying, okay, I'm going to be using you as the spare. I'm going to be using you as the main data drive. I'm writing my parity across them all. This is actually where memory would really come in handy, and a fast processor would come in handy. If I were to run this on like an old single core, that process could take like an hour. Yeah, that's not great. But we're done, so we're ready to go. Now tell me, so I've got myself a volume. Where do I go from here?
I would probably go up to the gears at the top that's labeled services. And we should be able to enable Zfs in there, which is what we would use to, click that on. And that's going to allow OS X and Windows to see this box, to access the data on this box, to use it as a server.
Right.
There's a ton of options inside of here, dynamic DNS and FTP if you want remote access for it. iSCSI, I don't think I'm ever going to touch. NMS, resync. This is like, if you want to get an education in acronyms, install a FreeNAS box and start taking a close look at all of the optional services in there. But generally speaking, once I have Zfs on, I'm pretty good. And then I'm going to go back to the, I want to say, go to Zfs, click on the wrench, make sure all the settings are correct, and then we can go in. And there it is. I should point out that I'm talking and Padre's clicking, so if it sounds disjointed, it's because
there's two brains going on here. Yeah.
So good. Do we want to change the work group? Do we need anything additional on there?
I think we're okay with
Description,
that.
FreeNAS server, UBA, log level, guest account. We're not currently assigning a, no, you do have a static IP address assigned to this.
Correct, right.
Cool. So as long as I'm on the same network, I should be able to see this with any of my machines.
Absolutely. As long as they know the IP address of 192.168.1.115, they should all be able to get over here, no matter what operating system they're using.
But first they have to get on your network.
But first they have to get my network, and first we also have to set up a share.
Yes.
Because what we've done is we've enabled the sharing service, but we haven't actually told the box yet who's going to access what and what volumes can they access. So I'm going to call this one DIY, just because,
That's easy.
Yeah, that's easy. One of the things I want to do is I also want to allow for guest access. You may not always want this.
Right.
Sometimes you're going to have a share. You may have a hidden share that you only want to be able to access yourself. If that's the case, then please don't allow guest access, because if you allow guest access, you're saying anyone on my network can get into this box.
I don't care who sees this.
I really don't care. And so I click that. And now, technically, since I've already, sorry about that. I wanted to go to the volume that we created, which is know-how. And once this is created, oh gosh, I really wish I had a mouse. I should theoretically have access to that share, yes?
Yes, and you should be able to upload data to that share and download data from that share. This is always the moment of truth. When I log in, will it happen? Do I see it? Does it show up?
Bam. And there we go. So what we've done is we've just created this. This is a 3.72 terabyte share on my FreeNAS box that I could load up with anything I want.
Quick, upload something to it. Upload something to it.
Well, you know what? I don't actually think I have it. Oh, you know what? Everyone needs the Firefox setup. So there we go. I think it's the only thing that on my computer that is. Uh-oh. Wait. See, and I knew we shouldn't have done. Oh, I didn't grant myself access. I'm a bad person.
No, you're not a bad person.
Yeah. No.
This is why, it's funny. There's really, really good detailed explanations up on the FreeNAS site that'll walk you through the configuration. Padre and I have both done this before, and we just made a basic error that denied us access to the server we just built. Yes!
Yeah. Now, we don't have much time left, but I would like to say one of the things that I really enjoyed about FreeNAS is that you can have it up and running in literally 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. But there are so many features in here. I like to talk a little bit about the plugins. What are some of the plugins that you run in on your FreeNAS box?
Anything that allows me to share musical files and access to my home. I don't know if you can pull in the plugins thing on there, but it should automatically have things like, oh my goodness, There's a brain inside of my head that should be thinking about the basic fundamental tool used to share media inside of my home. That's on every
like
single server I
DLNA.
build. Thank you, DLNA.
Yeah.
That's a really sad. The Crash Plan plugin is really cool because it'll actually let us sync stuff off of your FreeNAS up to your Crash Plan
You could
account.
run a torrent
Couch
plugin.
Potato, if you're not into, you know, the
Getting up.
That's actually really funny. I was going to say XBMC, but there should be, if you scroll down a little bit, I think there might be a Plex plugin now, an XBMC plugin. There's just an incredible, there's the Plex Media server available on there. Transmission is a BitTorrent client. There's a bunch of really, really, really cool things you can do to set up on your FreeNAS box that'll run in the background. Bringing this also back, the less powerful your system is, the fewer plugins you want running because
And actually, remember, if you start loading up your system with plugins and you notice that your read and write performance starts to decrease, that's why. Because you've loaded down the CPU and the CPU has less time to handle all the writes across its drives. Now, one quick thing before we go, Patrick, and that is a lot of people are going to be tempted to say, oh, wow, this is awesome. I've got all these parts down in the basement. And they're going to grab any drive they possibly can and drop it into the box. I would say no. What do you say?
If you're doing it as an experiment, feel free to load any junk drive you have inside of it. If you want to spend money, start looking at greens and reds. If you want to be serious about a NAS configuration, go straight to the Western Digital red drives.
Right.
That's just, you know, we could explain why, but we're actually out of time, judging from the waving of fingers I'm seeing from over on the desk. But basically, I run a lot of greens when I'm buying, because I bought all my greens before I have reds.
I know.
And then drives
I did
got
the same
expensive,
thing.
and I stopped drying them. And as I'm replacing them, I'm starting to buy WD reds.
I have 32 greens.
32.
And now I'm thinking about replacing them with reds.
Take your time.
I know exactly. They're not bad drives. It's just reds are better because they run cooler, they use up less power, they'll survive longer inside of a NAS array environment.
And there's all sorts of other things.
Yeah. Now, if you want to know more about FreeNAS, you want to know what we did and actually how I screwed up the guest write permissions, please go to our show notes page.
We screwed up?
We screwed up. You know, it's a group thing. Go to twit.tv/knowhow, KH, and you'll be able to find all of our episodes and a way to download each and every single juicy episode to your device of choice. Your iPad, your iPhone, your Android tablet or phone, your PC, your Mac, whatever it may be. We're going to get you the goodness, and we're going to give you the best show notes in the business. I'm Father Robert Ballecer.
Patrick Norton.
Now that you know how, go do it.